Millionaire Race podcast, where we're empowering you to maximize your potential and better your financial standing in order to improve many of the socio-economic problems that face the African American demographic today. My name is Toxi Ogunyemi, your host, and as always, happy to have you with us. Make sure to subscribe to the podcasts, hit the like button so that when any new episodes are uploaded, you get alerted. But also, when you subscribe and when you like the show, it helps spread the word to a lot more people. It helps our rankings, as they say, on the podcast sites. And that's very helpful to us because this, we believe, is an important message that needs to reach all of us. So thank you for doing that. To reach us for any comments, any questions, or if you'd like to be a guest on our show, please email me at toxy@themillrace.com. That's Toxy, Toksy, at themillrace, themillrace.com. Send us an email and we'll be happy to get back to you for your questions. We might even be able to answer some on the air because those questions that you have, believe me, there are lots of other people that have the same questions as well. So when you ask them and we answer them on the air, you are actually helping a lot of people. So let's get those emails going. Next week, I'll probably answer some of the questions that I've received already. But for today's show, I wanted to go over something that I found online. At the beginning of this podcast series, most of the information that I got was from the census.gov site. Based on the last census that was conducted, there was a lot of data that was in there, and you just have to sift through the data to get the information that you need, which for our purposes was showing the inequalities in the wealth that is held in this country. We as African Americans make up 12% of this nation, but as of that census data tabulation, we controlled about 2% of the wealth. Now there's additional data that may say it's slightly more than that, maybe 3%. But even at 3%, when 12% of the population control 2 to 3% of the wealth, that is very low. And that, of course, as we've discussed many times before, is a big part of the socio-economic problems we face as a demographic, as a group. It's why the branding of the African American is so poor in the United States. The Federal Reserve and other institutions also look into this data to pull out the information that they feel they need. Once in a while, it does bear closely to what we talk about on this show. And in going through some research for the show, as I have to do most of the time before I can put these together, I came across a report by the Federal Reserve, one of their Fed notes that was written on September 28th, 2020. The title of the report is Disparities in Wealth by Race and Ethnicity in the 2019 Survey of Consumer Finances. This report was written by Neil Buta, Andrew C. Chang, Lisa J. Detling, Joanne Su, with assistance from Julia Hewitt. And I give you all that information so you can find the report yourself if you want to read it. We won't have enough time for me to read the whole report online, but I want to pick out a lot of the main excerpts from here as they align very much with what we talk about on the show. So it starts by saying new data from the 2019 Survey of Consumer Finances show that long-standing and substantial wealth disparities between families in different racial and ethnic groups were little changed since the last survey in 2016. The fact that this report actually tallies off a previous report from a few years earlier is actually good news. That means they are tracking this data. And so hopefully if they keep coming up with these reports every few years, we'll be able to properly track and see the progress that we're making. But this particular report compared itself to the one in 2016 and said there wasn't much change, that the typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical black family. I'll repeat that. The typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical black family and 5 times the wealth of the typical Hispanic family. It continues for the purposes of this report to define wealth as the difference between a family's gross assets and their liabilities. Well, if you've been listening to this show, We know what that is, right? That's the straight definition of your net worth. What you own minus what you owe, that's your net worth. And that's really the only way to calculate your net worth. And that's the same thing that they're doing here. Again, what you own minus what you owe, whatever's left over, is your net worth. And that's what they're referring to as wealth as we go through this report. It continues by saying, in the 2019 survey, white families have the highest level of both median and mean family wealth, $188,200 and $983,400 respectively. Now, most of us may not remember the difference between a median and mean. That was stuff we did many years ago, right, when calculating averages. But basically, the median, if you have a set of numbers, say you've got 25 numbers, the median is the middle number, the number that falls right into the middle of that set of 25 numbers. That's the median number. The mean number is the average that is calculated by adding all the numbers together and dividing by the number. So if you again had 25 numbers, you add all those numbers together, divide them by 25, the answer that you get is the mean. That's the average of everyone. So this report takes track of both the median and the mean amounts of family wealth. So going back, it says that in the 2019 survey, white families have the highest level of both median and mean family wealth. $188,200 is the median wealth. So what that means, since that is the median number, 188,200, it means 50% of white families have less than 188,000 in wealth, while 50% have more than $188,000 in wealth. I wish, and there probably is, a way to calculate the 25% mark and the 75% mark to see exactly where those numbers lie. But for the purpose of this, 50% is fine. Before I jump to what the black families have, the mean family wealth for the white families is $983,400. So why is that so different? Well, that's because it's top heavy. When you calculate the mean, you add everybody's income. And don't forget, there's so many millionaires, billionaires. In fact, before we even go into the billionaires, there's so many more millionaires in white families. And so when you add all their income in, that's what raises up the mean. But in actual numbers, if you were to take everyone's individual numbers, 188,000 is the middle number that most folks have. Now, there'll be some who will be 170, 175, 160, 150, 140, all the way down to zero, I guess. But most people have around there and more, 188,000. Now compare that with the black and Hispanic families. The report says black and Hispanic families have considerably less wealth than white families. The black family's median and mean wealth is $24,100 and $142,500 respectively. Wow. That means 50% of the African American population, this is families, not even individuals, have a net worth of $24,000 or less. And when you add the other 50% and you add all the money all the rest of the 50% have, the mean wealth is $142,500. That's less than the median wealth of the white families. The report goes on to explain that the mean wealth calculation is substantially higher than the median, reflecting the concentration of wealth at the top of the wealth distribution for each group. So I explained that already, so that's understandable. The next section in the report talks about wealth over the life cycle. It says wealth accumulation generally follows a predictable life cycle arc, wherein families generally accumulate wealth during their working years in preparation for retirement. It says even among young families who have had relatively little time to accumulate wealth, there are sizable differences in wealth by race and ethnicity, most starkly between young black and young white families. The median young black family has no wealth at all. In fact, the calculation is minus $600. In contrast, to the median young white family that has a wealth of $25,400. And the report says differences in parental resources may contribute to these life cycle gaps, which we will discuss in the next section. So basically, what it's saying there that for young people who are starting out in life, the typical black family, the typical young black family has no money. They start off with no money. While the typical young white family starts off with, this is the median now, $25,000. And the report attributes this mostly to parental resources. So if we have funds, if we run this millionaire race, if you have a net worth of $1 million or more, our children will not be starting with negative $600 as this report says. That's why it's so important to run this race. It's not just for us, it's for our generations below us, because it's a cycle. When young families start off with negative $600, in order to survive, they start getting into debt at a young stage of their lives. When you start getting into debt, you start missing out on opportunities of accumulating assets, of investing, of growing your wealth. And so you end up growing older, becoming one of those larger families with a net worth of $24,000 when you should have a net worth of $400,000 by the time you reach your middle age years, if not more. Remember, as you run this race, we're not running it just for ourselves. We're running it for the generations behind us. The report goes on to talk about inheritances and other family support. Wealth holding can differ across groups due to the intergenerational transmission of wealth. There are numerous ways families can transmit wealth and resources across generations. Families can directly transfer their wealth to the next generation in the form of a bequest. They can also provide the next generation with gifts and transfer their wealth that way. For example, providing down payment support to enable a home purchase or a substantial wedding gift. By some estimates, bequests and transfers account for at least half of aggregate wealth, and have recently averaged 3% of total household disposable personal income. It also accounts for more of the racial wealth gap than any other demographic or socioeconomic indicator. What this is saying, once again, is part of the reason why the Caucasian families remain wealthy is because they get a lot of help from their parents. Now, I know there are some shows that people like to come on and say that they became millionaires and they didn't have any inheritance or anything, but what they fail to mention is all the investment that was put into them from the time that they were young, from all the monies that was given to them directly and indirectly in order to help them become successful. So when their parents pass on, they may not receive a direct inheritance, though some do. But before then, they've already received help all along the way, in whether it's education, whether it's when they're starting their business, whether it's buying a house. It's a big deal to be able to help your children. It's a big deal to be able to keep the wealth growing in your generation, that you have to have it to start off with. So continuing the report, it says, in addition to direct transfers or gifts, families can make investments in their children that indirectly increase their wealth, just like what we were saying. For example, families can invest in their children's educational success by paying for college or private schools, which can in turn increase their children's ability to accumulate wealth. For these reasons, wealth, or a lack thereof, can persist across generations and reflect, among other factors, a legacy of discrimination or unequal treatment in housing, education, and labor markets. This falls in line with all the things that we've been talking about over the last several weeks and months. It's a cycle that continues. It creates discrimination. It creates unequal treatment in housing and in education, and when we go into the job market, all based on the fact that there is no money. We don't have enough money. We have to get it. We have to run the millionaire race, and we have to become millionaires for ourselves and for our children. The report goes on to say, one reason wealth holding is relatively high among white families is that they are considerably more likely to have received an inheritance or gift. Another reason is white families report other indicators associated with higher levels of family support. For example, Nearly 30% of white families report having received an inheritance or gift, compared to about 10% of black families. Conditional upon receiving an inheritance or gift, white families also tend to receive larger inheritances. And it has a table here on inheritance amounts and all that, but I don't want to dwell on inheritance amounts alone because it goes beyond that. It's not just how much you receive when you're older and your parents or loved ones pass away, but it's the amount of investment that's been put in you all along that have helped you become a high income earner in the first place. When you've gone to good schools, when you've gone to college, when your parents are already connected with other people who are successful, where you can get good jobs. You don't even need an inheritance as much because you can provide for yourself, which is not something that is afforded to many of us because from the moment that you start, you're already kind of behind, as this report also shows, simply because of family wealth, family support. The report goes on to say white and other families are more likely to report other indicators associated with higher levels of family support. For example, white families are considerably more likely to report being able to obtain $3,000 from a family member or friend in a financial emergency than black or Hispanic families. They are also more likely to have a parent with a college degree, since higher levels of education are associated with higher levels of wealth. Yes, higher levels of education do have a direct correlation to higher levels of wealth. And that's why I continue to say that we must all aspire to have a college degree. We must inspire our young children, our younger population, that they need to have a college degree. Is going to college hard? Yes, it is. Anything good usually takes some effort. But the way the system has been set up has not encouraged us to do this, has not shown the direct correlation between going to college and future success. It doesn't guarantee future success, but it certainly pushes you well further than we are right now. The report moves into home ownership. It says for many families, housing is the biggest component of wealth. The relationship between housing and family wealth is complex. On the one hand, the ability to purchase a home is a reflection of wealth a family already has, or their parents' wealth, as noted earlier, as significant funds are generally required for a down payment and closing costs. On the other hand, home ownership has also been found to yield strong financial returns on average, and to be a key channel through which families build wealth. We've talked about that as to how real estate and home ownership is the second place where the most wealth is kept in this nation. But African Americans hold the lowest percentage of home ownership. So again, we hold the lowest amount of wealth. So we have to push. Yes, you need to own a home. We need to own houses, more than one. Why just one? Home ownership rises sharply from young to middle age, regardless of race or ethnicity. At the same time, however, within each group, there are significant gaps in home ownership between white and non-white families. Among young families, about 46% of white families own their own home compared to just 17% of black families. This gap may partially reflect differences in parental wealth, as previous research has found that black families are far less likely to receive down payment assistance from their parents, delaying transitions into home ownership. As a mortgage banker, I run into this all the time. A lot of our Caucasian friends already have their down payment. They receive gifts from their parents to help out. They have access to funds even when they are young families. A lot of our African American brothers and sisters, they don't. And as such are typically looking for down payment assistance programs. But we can change this. Let's get together. Let's band together. Let's run this millionaire race and let's change this. The report goes on. It says, in addition to gaps in home ownership, there are also significant gaps in home values among homeowners by race and ethnicity. The typical white family's home value is $230,000. The typical black family's home values are lower at $150,000. The next section talks about retirement accounts and plan participation. And it goes on to say that the participation in retirement accounts like 401ks, IRAs, etc. is a lot higher in white families than it is in black families. In other words, we're not investing enough. And if you recall from a previous podcast, we talked about, in fact, we mentioned that the number one place in the United States where wealth is held is in retirement accounts. And we don't have a lot of that going on. We have a very small share of that, which we have to increase that. But you're right. It's not easy to invest when you're struggling with debt. It's not easy to invest when you're worrying about daily living. And that's why we have to turn this around and turn it around now by knowing our net worth, creating a budget, getting out of debt, increasing the value of our time so that we can make more income, planning for the future. Then we can be investing. Then we can prepare ourselves to buy a house the proper way. All the things that we talk about and will continue to talk about. But the bottom line is we have to be intentional about all this. We have to understand what's happening. We're not blaming anyone. This is just what's happening. And so we have to be intentional about making this better. And that's a summary of the main excerpts from this report. It's a great report if you want to read it on your own. I saw it and I just had to share it with everyone, and I'll look for some others because it's important to continually dig into this data. This is how we'll know we are making a change as a group, as a demographic. The information is not to bring us down. It's just as always to let us know where we are and the importance and the urgency of what needs to happen in order to change all this. If we can individually work to run the millionaire race, all these things will change organically. They will, just naturally. But we have to help one another to achieve this. It's not easy to do, to earn a net worth of $1 million. It's not easy, otherwise we'd all have it already. But it is so possible. It is so doable. If you put the right processes in place, if you start taking the right steps, we can and we will achieve that together. The Bible in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 12 says, "For wisdom is a defense, as money is a defense." Yes, the Bible says money is a defense, and it is. It helps. That's why if you compare when a rich person's son gets into trouble, how they're able to get the best lawyers and get out of that trouble, not spend a night in jail, compared to a poor person or African American that gets into trouble and is not able to have the money for that defense and ends up lounging in jail, lounging away for more time than they should. There was a story on the news a few months back about a young man who died in prison just because he couldn't make bail. He wasn't even meant to be there, but because he couldn't make bail, he was stuck in prison and he died there. So yes, the Bible knows what it's talking about when it says money is a defense. And of course, wisdom is a defense. It says the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. So we're sharing knowledge on this show. Knowledge about how to handle your finances. Knowledge about why it's important to run the millionaire race and have that money and pass that on. And wisdom takes that knowledge and helps you apply it in your particular situation. So take the knowledge. Ask us any questions that you may have, anything that you are struggling with, anything that you want clarification on. Go ahead and ask the question. We'll share it here. We're all learning together. And at the same time, we're bringing in people. Those are the folks we interview who have actually run the race. And they are also sharing their knowledge and their wisdom, how they applied their knowledge to achieve the things that they did. And together, we will run and win this millionaire race and become the millionaire race. My name is Toxio Guillermi. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.